in Pinewood, Oregon, where the city meets the Cascade Mountains, the line between urban life and wilderness, is thin. Officer Jake Monroe, a 20-year veteran of the Pinewood Police Department, has spent decades patrolling this boundary raised by a forest ranger. Jake has always felt a deep connection to nature, but what awaited him in that abandoned factory would challenge everything he thought he knew about the wild. A desperate cry echoing through crumbling walls, a precarious ledge 20 feet above concrete, and trapped between certain death and an uncertain rescue, a young bobcat with amber eyes that seem to plead for help. Some say wild animals don't remember that they don't form bonds with humans, that the boundary between our worlds can never truly be crossed. Officer Jake Monroe knows differently. This is the remarkable, true story of a rescue that came full circle, proving that compassion, even shown to the wildest of creatures, may someday find its way home. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across a Pinewood, a mid-sized city nestled against the foothills of the Cascade Mountains in Oregon. The city had grown considerably over the past decade, with new housing developments steadily encroaching upon the wilderness that had once defined the region. It was this delicate balance between urban expansion and wild terrain that Officer Jake Monroe knew all too well. At 43, Jake had spent the better part of 2 decades with the Pinewood Police Department, his weathered face etched with the fine lines of experience. Spoke of countless hours patrolling the city's boundaries where civilization met wilderness. The son of a forest ranger, Jake had grown up with a deep respect for wildlife and often volunteered with local conservation efforts. When off duty on this particular Wednesday in November, Jake was nearing the end of his shift patrolling the Eastern District, where several old industrial buildings stood scheduled for demolition. The area had once been a thriving manufacturing hub in the 1970s, but had fallen into disrepair as businesses moved operations overseas. The radio in his patrol car crackled with routine chatter as he drove slowly past the old Westmore Textile Factory, a sprawling brick structure that had been partially dismantled the previous week. Something caught his attention, a faint distress sound carrying on the crisp autumn air. Jake pulled his vehicle to the curb, lowered his window, and listened intently. There it was again, a high-pitched, urgent cry that didn't sound human, yet conveyed unmistakable distress. Jake reached for his radio dispatch. "This is Officer Monroe. I'm at the old Westmore building on East Pine, hearing some unusual sounds inside the structure. Going to check it out." Copy that. Officer Monroe came to response. "Be advised that building is marked unsafe. Proceed with caution. Do you need backup?" Jake hesitated, scanning the building's facade. "Negative at this time. Will advise if needed." Grabbing his flashlight and securing his utility belt, Jake approached the chain-link fence surrounding the property. A large trespassing sign hung from the padlocked gate, but Jake noticed a section where the fence had been pulled away, creating a gap large enough for someone or something to slip through. The cries grew more distinct as he approached the main entrance, its doors long removed and leaving a gaping mouth into the building's shadowy interior. Jake flicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting through dust particles dancing in the air. "Hello, anyone in here?" His voice echoed through the cavernous space. The answering cry came from somewhere above, a sound that Jake now recognized was not human at all. It held the distinctive pitch of a feline in distress, but deeper and more guttural than any house cat. Moving carefully through the debris-strewn floor, Jake made his way toward a metal staircase that clung precariously to the wall. Each step creaked ominously beneath his weight, but held firm as he ascended to the second floor. The building's second level was in worse condition than the first. Large sections of the floor had been removed, creating dangerous pits that plunged straight to the concrete below. The demolition crew had been in the middle of their work when they'd left for the day, leaving behind a treacherous maze of exposed Beams and crumbling plaster, the cries LED Jake toward the eastern wall were. Large windows, most with broken panes, overlooked the forest beyond the city. Limits as he approached his flashlight beam finally illuminated the source of the distress perched on a narrow ledge created by a partially collapsed section. Of wall was a young bobcat, its tongue first speckled with the distinctive dark spots. Of adolescence, the creature couldn't have been more than 6 months old barely. More than a kitten, and its amber eyes reflected the flashlight's beam with a terrified glow. Jake immediately understood the predicament. The ledge the young bobcat occupied was part of an interior wall that had once separated rooms, but now stood exposed due to the demolition. Below the ledge was a 20-foot drop to the bare concrete. The animal was effectively trapped, too frightened to attempt a leap that could prove fatal. "Well, hello there," Jake said softly. Keeping his distance, but assessing the situation, the bobcat hissed in response, backing as far as it could against the wall, its small body trembling. Jake reached for his radio. "Dispatch, Officer Monroe, I've located the source of the sounds out. A juvenile bobcat trapped on a ledge inside the building. Looks like it might have wandered in from the woods nearby and got itself stuck when the demolition made its exit route unstable." "Copy that. Do you want me to contact animal control?" Jake glanced at his watch. It was nearly 6 p.m., and he knew the local animal control office would be minimally staffed at this hour. By the time they arrived and assessed the situation, it might be too late for the frightened animal. "Negative. I'm going to see if I can handle this myself. The ledge doesn't look stable, and this little one's getting more agitated. Request backup from Officer Ramirez. If he's still in the area, he's got experience with the wildlife rescue." "Group." "Copy that. Officer Ramirez is approximately 10 minutes from your location. Will redirect." Jake pocketed his radio and considered his options. The bobcat was about 15 feet away on a ledge that could be reached by carefully traversing an exposed beam. The risk was substantial, not just from the potential fall, but from the frightened wild animal itself. Even a juvenile bobcat possessed sharp claws and teeth capable of inflicting serious injury. From his utility belt, Jake removed a pair of heavy-duty gloves he kept for handling sharp objects during searches. They weren't ideal for animal handling, but offered better protection than nothing. He also retrieved a small package of beef jerky he'd been saving for a snack. "All right, little one," he murmured. "Let's see if we can find some common ground here." Tearing off a small piece of jerky, Jake tossed it onto the ledge, well away from himself, but within the bobcat's reach. The animal's nose twitched, catching the scent of meat, but it remained frozen in place, eyes fixed on Jake, moving with deliberate slowness. Jake began to edge his way along the beam that led toward the ledge. The wood groaned beneath his weight, sending a shower of dust and small debris to the floor below. "Officer Monroe," the voice echoed from the stairwell. "Up here." Ramirez J. called back, not taking his eyes off the bobcat's second floor. "East wall. Move carefully. Floors not stable." Officer Miguel Ramirez appeared moments later, his stocky frame moving with surprising agility through the obstacle course of the demolition site. At 35, Ramirez was one of the department's most respected officers, and like Jake, harbored a passion for wildlife conservation. "Well, would you look at that?" Ramirez whispered, taking him a scene. "How'd I get in here?" "Probably through that gap in the fence," Jake replied. "Found some tracks in the dust downstairs. Must have been exploring and got spooked when it couldn't find its way back out." Ramir nodded, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. "That ledge doesn't look like it'll hold much longer. Vibrations from the demolition probably weakened it." As if to emphasize his point, a small chunk of plaster broke free from beneath the bobcat's paws, plummeting to the concrete below. The animal cried out, again pressing itself flatter against the wall. "I've got a rescue carrier in my trunk." Ramirez offered standard equipment for the wildlife volunteer team. "Give me 5 minutes." While Ramirez hurried back to his vehicle, Jake continued his careful approach. "Easy now," he soothed, his voice deliberately calm and low. "We're going to get you out of here, but you've got to trust me a little." The bobcat's eyes never left him, but its posture shifted, slightly less defensive, more attentive Jake tossed another small piece of jerky. Closer to the animal this time, the bobcat stretched forward cautiously, sniffing the offering before quickly snatching it up. That's it, Jake encouraged just a little cooperation. That's all I'm asking. By the time Reyes returned with a large pet carrier in a thick blanket, Jake had positioned himself within a few feet of the ledge. The bobcat had accepted several pieces of jerky, but remained wary, muscles tense for escape that wasn't possible. How do you want to play this? Ramirez asked, keeping his voice low. Jake, consider their options. The ledge won't support both of us. I'll continue forward, try to get the blanket around it once I have a secure hold. I'll pass it back to you for the carrier. Ramirez nodded, handing the blanket to Jake. Be careful with those claws. Bobcats this age can still do some serious damage. Jake slowly unfurled the blanket, holding it stretched between his hands. The bobcat's ears flattened against its head, a low growl emanating from its throat. I know, Jake murmured. This isn't ideal for either of us, but it's the best option we've got. With a deep breath, Jake made his final approach. The beam beneath him shifted slightly, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his system. The bobcat sensed the chain, its muscles bunching as if preparing to leap a jump that would almost certainly result in injury or worse. Jake lunged forward, throwing the blanket over the animal in one swift motion. The bobcat yelled in protest, twisting and thrashing beneath the fabric as Jake carefully gathered the corners, creating a secure bundle with the frightened creature inside. The ledge chose that moment to give way completely. Jake felt the sickening sensation of falling, his body pitching forward into empty space. With one hand clutching the bundled bobcat, he reached desperately for support, with the other fingers scraping against rough brick and finding purchase on an exposed piece of rebar. Monroe, Ramirez shouted, rushing forward as far as he safely could. Jake hung suspended, one arm straining to hold his weight, the other cradling the struggling bundle containing the bobcat. Stay back, he commanded through gritted teeth. Floor won't hold us both. The muscles in his shoulder screamed in protest as he dangled 20 feet above the concrete floor. The bobcat had gone still within the blanket, perhaps sensing the precariousness of their situation. There's a beam about 2 feet to your right, Ramirez directed, if you can swing toward it. I think you can get your footing. Summoning his remaining strength, Jake began to swing his body pendulum-like toward the beam Ramirez had indicated. On the third swing, his feet made contact, finding precarious purchase on the narrow wood. That's it, Ramirez encouraged. Now work your way along it toward me. With excruciating slowness, Jake inched his way along the beam, one hand still gripping the rebar, the other clutching the bundled bobcat against his chest. He could feel the rapid heartbeat of the frightened animal through the blanket. When he finally reached a section of stable flooring, Ramirez grasped his uniform shirt and hauled him to safety. Both officers collapsed onto the dusty floor, breathing heavily. The cat, Ramirez asked between breaths. Jake carefully loosened his grip on the bundle. The blanket shifted, and a pair of amber eyes peered out wide with fear, but apparently unharmed. Looks okay, Jake confirmed. Let's get it in the carrier before it decides to thank me. With its claws together, they managed to transfer the bobcat to the carrier, securing the door before removing the blanket completely. The young animal pressed itself against the back of the enclosure, its sides heaving with rapid breaths, but otherwise appearing uninjured. What's the plan? Reyes asked as they carefully made their way back down the treacherous staircase. Jake carrying the carrier with its precious cargo. Go. There's that wildlife rehabilitation center, about 40 minutes north of here, Jake replied. The one run by Dr. Elaine Sanders. They specialize in treating and releasing local predator species. Good call. Wanted to take it. Your shift ended 20 minutes ago. Jake shook his head, feeling an inexplicable connection to the frightened creature. I've got this. I'll file the report tomorrow. The drive to the Northern Cascades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took Jake through winding mountain roads as daylight faded into dusk. Occasionally, he glanced at the carrier secured in his passenger seat, catching glimpses of the bobcat's reflective eyes watching him wearily from within the center's grounds were. Nestled in a clearing surrounded by dense forest, its buildings designed to blend harmoniously with the natural environment despite the late-hour lights. Still burned in the main treatment facility, Dr. Elaine Sanders met Jake at the entrance, her silver hair pulled back. In a practical ponytail, deep lines around her eyes, speaking of decades spent in sun and wind, at 68 she showed no signs of slowing her lifelong dedication to wildlife conservation. Officer Monroe, she greeted him warmly. Miguel called ahead, "Let's see what you've brought us in the examination." Room Elaine carefully transferred the Bobcat to a special handling enclosure where she could examine it. Without risk of escape, the animal had calmed somewhat during the journey, but still hissed defensively when the carrier door opened. Female, approximately 6 months old, Elaine noted, observing the Bobcat through the enclosure's clear panels, appears healthy at first glance. "But we'll do a full workup. Will she be releasable?" Jake asked, surprising himself. With how much he cared about the answer, Elaine studied the Bobcat thoughtfully. "Barring any health issues, yes, she's young, but old enough to have learned hunting skills from her mother. The fact that she was afraid of you is actually a good sign, means she hasn't habituated to humans." Relief washed over Jake. "Where will you release her?" "We have an arrangement with the Forest Service for releases in the Eastern Cascade Preserve. It's protected land about 30 miles from human settlements, plenty of prey, water, and territory for a young Bobcat to establish herself." Jake nodded, satisfied. He found himself reluctant to leave, watching as the Bobcat prowled the perimeter of her temporary enclosure. Elaine noticed his lingering presence. "You know, we always need volunteers for releases. It's quite something to see them return to the wild." "I'd like that," Jake replied without hesitation. "Just let me know when over the next 3 weeks." Jake found himself visiting the rehabilitation center frequently during his off hours. The young Bobcat, whom the staff had nicknamed Ledge in honor of her rescue location, had indeed proved healthy. Dr. Sanders had confirmed she was simply a victim of curiosity and bad timing, having wandered into the building and become disoriented when her exit route collapsed during demolition. Jake observed as Ledge gradually regained her confidence, moving from the stress of captivity to a calculated weariness that was natural for her species. In the center's large pre-release enclosure, she demonstrated proficient hunting skills, easily catching the live prey introduced to prepare her for independence. "She's ready," Elaine informed Jake one crisp December morning. "We're planning the release for tomorrow at dawn. Still interested in joining us?" Jake rearranged his schedule without hesitation, arriving at the center while stars still punctuated the pre-dawn sky. Ledge had been carefully transferred to a specialized transport carrier designed to open from a distance via a pulley system, allowing the animal to emerge on her own terms without human proximity. The release site was a beautiful meadow bordered by dense forest in the Eastern Cascade Preserve. Jake helped carry the carrier deep into the area, setting it down facing the tree line as the first rays of sunlight crested the mountains. "Ready?" Elaine asked, handing Jake the pulley cord. "You did the rescuing. Seems fitting you should do the releasing." With a nod, Jake gently pulled the cord. The carrier door swung open smoothly, but Ledge remained inside, cautious. The small group of humans retreated to a respectful distance, waiting. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the Bobcat finally emerged, her movements deliberate and alert. She paused at the carrier's threshold, amber eyes scanning her surroundings, nose testing the air. In one fluid motion, she bounded across the meadow and disappeared into the forest, offering one final glance back at the humans who had intervened in her fate. In that brief moment of eye contact, Jake felt an unexpected connection, a mutual acknowledgement between two very different beings whose paths had crossed under extraordinary circumstances. "That's what makes this job worthwhile," Elaine said softly beside him. Knowing she has her whole life ahead of her, where she belongs, life returned to its normal rhythm for Jake Monroe. Winter deepened across Oregon, bringing heavy snows to the Cascades and steady rain to Pinewood. The incident with the Bobcat became a story he occasionally shared with colleagues, a reminder of why he'd become an officer in the first place to protect all the inhabitants of his community, human or otherwise. March arrived with its promise of spring melting the winter accumulation and swelling the rivers that course through the region. The increased moisture brought its own dangers, saturating the ground and destabilizing the geological features that characterize the area. On the 15th of March, shortly after 2 a.m., residents of Inwood were jolted awake by the unmistakable shuddering of an earthquake at 5.7 magnitude. It wasn't catastrophic by West Coast standards, but for a community built partially on reclaimed wetlands, the impact was significant. Jake was awakened by the emergency alert on his phone, followed immediately by a call from dispatch. Within 20 minutes, he was in his patrol car navigating streets littered with debris from damaged structure, all available units to Riverside Apartments on Maple Street. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Structure compromise reported with possible entrapment. Fire and rescue en route. The Riverside Apartments was an older complex built in the 1960s before modern seismic codes were implemented. As Jake pulled up to the scene, he immediately spotted the damage. A significant portion of the east wing had collapsed, creating a pile of concrete, wood, and personal belongings. Residents in various states of dress huddled in the parking lot, some crying, others calling out names of missing neighbors. Jake quickly joined the other first responders in establishing a perimeter and accounting for residents. We're missing at least 4 people from the East Wing. Fire Captain Reynolds informed the assembled emergency personnel. Structural engineers on the way, but we can't wait. We're organizing search teams. Now Jake was paired with a firefighter named Collins, assigned to check the section nearest the collapse for survivors who might be trapped in partially damaged apartments. They worked methodically, calling out as they entered each unit, helping disoriented residents to safety. On the 3rd floor, they encountered an elderly man pinned beneath a fallen bookcase, unable to reach his walker. After freeing him and ensuring he could be evacuated safely by another team, Jake continued down the hallway alone while Collins escorted the man to the stairwell. The building groaned ominously, dust filtering down from new cracks in the ceiling. Jake knew he should wait for his partner's return, but the sound of faint crying from the next apartment spurred him forward. Inside, he found a mother clutching a toddler, both trapped in the bathroom, where falling debris had blocked the door. With adrenaline-fueled strength, Jake cleared enough material to create an opening. "You need to come out now," he urged. "The building's not stable." The woman passed her child through the gap to Jake as she began to follow. An aftershock rumbled through the structure. Jake had just enough time to shield the child with his body as the ceiling above them gave way. When the dust settled, Jake found himself in near total darkness, a crushing weight across his lower body, and the terrified cries of the child somewhere nearby, but out of reach. Pain radiated from his pinned legs, and when he attempted to move, the debris shifted dangerously. "Collins," he shouted, "anyone, we're here. 3rd floor, east side." His flashlight had been knocked from his hand in the collapse, but he could just make out its beam several feet away, illuminating swirling dust particles. The child's cries grew more distant. Someone must have reached her from another direction and carried her to safety. Jake's radio had been crushed in the fall. Alone in the darkness, he focused on controlling his breathing and assessing his situation. The way to cross his legs wasn't causing critical pain, suggesting they weren't crushed, but merely pinned. The real danger was the unstable debris above him. Any rescue attempt could trigger a further collapse. Time became fluid in the darkness. Jake drifted in and out of awareness, the pain and restricted circulation to his legs occasionally jolting him back to full consciousness. He called out periodically, but heard no response beyond the distant sounds of rescue operations elsewhere in the building. It could have been minutes or hours later when Jake became aware of an odd scratching sound above him. At first, he dismissed it as settling debris or his own disorientation, but the sound continued, purposeful and rhythmic. "Hello." He called out, his voice horror from dust and thirst. The scratching paused briefly, then resumed with increased intensity. Dust and small pieces of material began to filter down near Jake's head someone or something was digging Jake's first. Thought was of rescue dogs. The local fire department had 2 trained search and rescue canines that might have picked up his scent, but as a small opening appeared in the debris above him, allowing a shaft of emergency lighting to penetrate his dark prison, what he saw made his breath catch. A pair of amber eyes peered down at him, unmistakable eyes he had looked into months before. Impossible, Jake, whispered the Bobcat. It had to be Ledge, though she had grown considerably. Continued to dig at the opening, her powerful paws working methodically to widen the gap. How she had come to be in an urban apartment building during an earthquake defied logic, but Jake's pain clouded mind couldn't focus on that mystery. Now, the opening grew larger as the Bobcat cleared away smaller pieces of debris. She worked with surprising precision, as if understanding the precariousness of the larger pieces that still trapped Jake. Occasionally, she would disappear from view, only to return moments later to continue her efforts. A shaft of more intense light suddenly joined the ambient glow, accompanied by human voices. I swear I heard animal sounds over here, someone was saying in an apartment building during an earthquake. Another voice responded skeptically, just help me check this section. The thermal imaging showed something alive beneath this spot. The Bobcat froze at the human voices, her eyes locked with Jake in a moment of silent communication. Then with fluid grace, she retreated from the opening she had created. Hello, Jake called out, his voice stronger now, with renewed hope. I'm down here, Officer Monroe, PPD. We've got a live one. The voice above grew excited. Officer, trapped below debris, alert medical, and get the extraction team. The rescue that followed was methodical and tense. The opening the Bobcat had started provided the rescue team with a crucial access point, allowing them to assess Jake's situation and strategize the safest way to free him without triggering a secondary collapse. 3 hours later, Jake was finally extracted from the rubble, his legs bruised and swollen, but remarkably intact. As paramedics stabilized him on a stretcher, he kept searching the perimeter of the rescue scene. Did you see it? He asked one of the firefighters who had helped free him. The Bobcat, the man, gave him a concerned look, clearly attributing the question to shock or confusion. No, wildlife reported at the scene. Officer, you're in downtown Pinewood. Jake fell silent, wondering if he had hallucinated. The amber eyes and scratching paws, but as the stretcher was being loaded into the ambulance, he caught a glimpse of movement at top the building across the street. A distinctive tawny form with a bobtail observing the scene from a safe distance before melting away into the prion shadows. Recovery took time. Jake's injuries, while not life-threatening, required weeks of physical therapy to restore full mobility to his legs. During his convalescence, he repeatedly recounted the story of the Bobcat's intervention to his fellow officers, most of whom responded with polite skepticism. Bobcats don't come into the city center, Monroe, Chief Wilson had said kindly but firmly, and they certainly don't remember humans or attempt to save them. You are oxygen deprived and in shock. Only Miguel Ramirez seemed willing to entertain the possibility wildlife behavior isn't always what we expect, he said during one of his visits to Jake's hospital room. There are documented cases of wild animals forming unusual attachments or demonstrating unexpected behaviors towards specific humans. Whether anyone believed him or not, Jake knew what he had experienced. As soon as he was physically able, he began making regular drives to the eastern edge of Pinewood, where urban development yielded to wilderness, the transitional zone where a Bobcat might venture on his 5th such excursion. Nearly 2 months after the earthquake, Jake's persistence was rewarded as he sat on the hood of his car at sunset, overlooking the valley where the city met the forest. Movement at the tree line caught his attention. The Bobcat and emerged cautiously larger than he remembered from the rehabilitation center, but with the same distinctive markings. She paused at the forest edge, amber eyes fixed on Jake with unmistakable recognition. Hello, Ledge, he said softly, remaining perfectly still. The Bobcat sat on her hunches, maintaining the considerable distance between them, close enough to observe, but well beyond what she would consider Threatening for nearly 20 minutes, they remained in this silent communion as the sun sank behind the mountains. Just as twilight deepened into dusk, the bobcat rose and turned back toward the forest. At the edge of the trees, she paused for one final glance back at the human whose life had become intertwined with hers. Through chance and circumstance, Jake raised his hand in a small gesture of acknowledgement. The bobcat blinked slowly. What cat behavior is recognized as a sign of trust before disappearing into her woodland domain in the years that followed. Jake Monroe became a regular advocate for wildlife conservation in Pinewood, working with city planners to establish protected corridors that allowed wild animals to navigate around human development safely. The story of his rescue spread, embellished in the retelling until it achieved almost mythical status among local conservation groups. Occasionally, during his visits to the forest edge, Jake would glimpse a now mature female bobcat observing him from a distance, never approaching, never fully revealed, but present nonetheless. Whether it was always the same animal, he couldn't be certain, but he liked to believe it was Ledge, maintaining their unlikely connection across the boundary that separated their worlds. The tale of the officer and the bobcat became a reminder to the resident of Pinewood that compassion could transcend species, that an act of kindness might return in unexpected ways, and that the wild heart of nature still beats strongly alongside their human community, separate but inexorably connected.